Okay, hi Rob. Nice meeting you here. How was your journey here?
It was okay, apart from Schiphol is like a zoo.
Okay.
Amsterdam.
Yeah.
This place is it's just awful.
You flew from UK, right?
Yeah, I flew from the UK to Schiphol.
Schiphol. And to
Amsterdam, and then Amsterdam
to Warsaw.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
first thing first, do you still own a 664?
No.
Yeah, and do you use it?
Do I what?
Do you use it?
No, I don't own one.
You don't?
No.
Okay.
Okay, you and Demosen, I mean, your songs were absolutely first on Commodore and they were ripped for every music disc. So how do you feel about ripping your music for the productions of Demosen, like the music discs?
That doesn't really bother me, you know. I mean, I was doing all the games in the 80s, up until about 88 when I left Britain to work for Electronic Arts. And towards the late 80s, that whole demo scene was evolving. And I felt like part of that scene with the games that Thalamus were doing, and some of the guys from the demo scene became programmers and did games. And some strange things used to happen in those days. I used to do a game, and then the hackers in Germany would then send me a copy of the game, and they had great pride in sending me a copy of the game, either with the scrolling messaging before the game was actually released in England, you know. So I mean, I didn't really have a problem with all those guys in the demo scene, and you know, I mean, if they were pirating, then it didn't really bother me because I wasn't affected.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, making music in 80s was very hard because there were mostly no tools for making music. So your music is actually a kind of code. You are a programmer. You made music making code or Commodore 64.
The only thing that I had back in the 80s was the same thing that the programmer who did the game had, which was an assembler. So you'd write, you know, 6502 mnemonics, which was the code, and then I'd have like data structures set up, which would be hexadecimal data structures, and all done in assembly language, and then I would hit assemble the thing, and then make a sys call to try to check it out, you know. The difference for me was the fact that I could run something called a machine code monitor, and I could get like, rows of 8 bytes. Maybe I could get 32 bytes up on the screen. So that would be straight hexadecimal dump, right? And then I could edit those bytes in real time, and I could tweak all the SID parameters and things like that in real time until I got it to do what I wanted to do.
So now we know that most of the music has been made using monitor on Commodore 64, so?
Say that again?
That means that most of the music has been made using a monitor, a code machine monitor.
Yeah.
That's absolutely crazy.
Yeah. But I mean, it was a little bit more than that because, you know, there was the initial idea for a tune which I would sketch out on manuscript paper. And then I'd like code a little bit of that into the player. I mean, I knew all the chromatic pitches pretty much off by heart in hexadecimal back then. So like 3-0 hex would be a C, 3C hex would be the octave above that, 4-8 would be the octave above that. And that's all I can remember because it's 30 years ago, but back then I knew all the numbers, you know, and I could get a machine code dump and recognize basically exactly what was going on because I knew the hex that well.
You have to be very focused man on music. I mean, a lot of things you made in very short period of time, like the Commando music, for example.
Yeah, I mean, everybody brings up the Commando thing because we went to the pub and then they locked me off. They locked me in the office at about 10 o'clock at night. They went home and I was locked in the office with a machine. And I basically got on with a job, and then I remember about 5 o'clock in the morning. I thought I'd better do the high score tune. I did that in about 2 minutes. And then I had to start doing all the sound effects, and I got finished by about 8 o'clock in the morning.
Great.
Then I left them, got a train back up to Newcastle from Birmingham.
That was fast.
But then I sent them an invoice for the money, and that was it.
We know that in the 70s you were a studio musician, right? In the 70s. What made you become interested in home computers? Or was it the music, or was the home computers in general?
What happened to me was that I was always a musician, and I was working as a professional musician, doing all kinds of jobs to earn money, and then all the electronics magazines and all the musician magazines were saying, if you're going to be into music, you need to learn about computers. And that's when I got interested in the computing side of it. And the only reason I bought a C64 was because it had 64K of memory, which was considered an elephant's worth of memory in those days. And it had the SID chip, which was better than the other machines had. And I kind of, from there, I used to type in the listings from the magazines, because all the hobbyist magazines used to have listings which never worked. They never ever worked.
You have to debug and
so then
fix
you'd have
them.
to try and figure out what on earth is not working. And you become intrigued by the programming language and the fact that the computer's always telling you how stupid you are. You try and get something to work and the computer says no, and it crashes. And so then you then have this, you go through this process where you want to try to learn about the stuff and make it work.
And did you learn assembly language as an extension of this process? Or?
Yeah. I started with BASIC, and I coded some music up in BASIC just for the hell of it,
Using pokes.
And using pokes, yeah, exactly. And it just sounded like somebody who had drunk 10 pints of Guinness and had like a dyslexic sense of rhythm and no sense of pitch. It was just dreadful. So it was just like when people try to make a sprite across the screen in BASIC, and it wobbles across like that, Exactly. So you then have to learn assembly language to try to make anything happen.
Okay. Bartek? Okay, so obviously you know SID chip inside and out. And
well, no, I used to. I don't now.
I
used to.
Yeah. What do you hate about the SID chip? Are there any features that made you feel a pain in the back when you were composing and programming your pieces?
At the time, there was other things out on the market in the professional music industry, like the Prophet 5, and some of these other synths that you would have died to have inside the C64, but you were stuck with a little SID chip. So that's all you had, and you had to basically, try to make the best of what you had. But the worst thing was the fact that the filters were always different on the SID chip.
Okay.
And so you could never rely on them to produce what you were trying to do.
But you didn't use much filtering on your tunes, did you?
Not early on, no. I mean, I tried to a bit later on, because you're always striving to try to maybe push it a bit further and try to do something that sounds a little bit different.
Okay. And besides the C64, you also made music for 8-bit Ataris, right?
For what?
For 8-bit Atari computers.
Yeah, I did.
Did you program your own sound routine for Atari?
For the Atari, yeah, I did.
For the Pokey chip?
Yeah. The little Atari guy had some strange anomalies because it only had like an 8-bit frequency register. So as you went higher in pitch, the resolution got less and less, and it became very difficult to get certain notes in tune.
Yeah.
So you'd have to basically try to write around the fact that you could only get like certain when you went higher up, you could only get like 3 or 4 pitches. So you just couldn't write anything that you wanted to do, you know.
So it was a difficult chip to work with?
In that sense, it was, yeah. I remember the assembler was really good. There was a cartridge assembler that would fit straight in the Atari, which was a really fantastic assembler.
Okay, I see. Bartek?
What about your tunes? Your favorite tune you ever made? The best one, you think?
My favorite tune? I don't really have one, to be honest. I got a few that, you know, to me stand out, and I did some stinkers as well. I wrote some awful stuff, you know, but nobody asked about that, thank God. But, you know, I mean, there's a couple of things that I think they're all right, you know.
Do you remember which was the longest tune you did?
The longest?
Yeah.
The Knuckle Busters thing was
exactly. 70 minutes.
17 minutes of pure insanity.
How long it took you to make this tune?
About 3.
Obviously not the overnight process, right?
No, it was about 3 days, I think.
Okay.
Maybe 3 or 4 days. You know.
Okay, I see. Okay, so let's imagine it's 1986 and you've just completed a tune for C64 game. Now what? So, do you consult the main programmer to fit the tune into the game, or do you have to trim something off, or what do you do?
How did I integrate in the game?
Yeah, exactly.
Basically, a lot of the time I would meet with the programmer and have what we call a negotiation, you know, because I'd say, well, how much memory do I get? And he'd say, K. And I'd say, okay, you find somebody else to do the gig. I'm not doing it for, you know, I can't possibly work with 1K.
Yeah.
So I would like barter my way until I got 5K. And then they would say, well, how much processor time do you need? And I'd say, well, I don't know, about that much raster time on the interrupt.
Yeah.
And then part of that process would then be saying, you know, because the code was not totally relocatable, we had to come to an agreement on whereabouts in memory this thing was going to reside.
So you compiled this to be...
I would compile it at a specific address where he wanted, you know, and I might also negotiate 6502 had like the first 256 bytes were called 0 page, and so I'd negotiate also a little bit of that 0 page memory.
Oh yeah, you have to share the variables with the main program.
Yeah, and then I would compile at that specific address, and there was a bunch of jump instructions at the beginning of the routine that he would then call to execute things.
Okay, so it wasn't just the music, it was special effects, right? Wasn't just the tune, it was the spot effects, the sound effects in
sound
the game.
Sound effects as well, yeah.
Yeah.
So generally it was the whole package, yeah.
The whole package.
The whole package, you know, main tune and then other tunes, the high score tune, and then, you know, 20, 25 sound effects as well.
Okay, I see.
Rob, what is your favorite old school computer?
What's my favorite computer?
Yeah, the old school one. I mean, Commodores, Ataris, Amigas, and so on.
My favorite computer, I don't know really. I mean, obviously I always liked the 64 because it's first thing that I learned, you know. There was the consoles as well does that include the consoles?
Yeah, why not? Including consoles too.
I liked the Sega Genesis a lot. That was quite a fun machine which had a dedicated Z80 or Z80 processor with a 68000 as the main processor and an FM chip. I quite like that machine, you know. I never really liked any of the Nintendo boxes, you know. Not that I did stuff on the Nintendo boxes, but I never really liked them that much. And to be honest, I never really liked the PlayStation either.
Okay, talking about favorite computers, you're also credited for several ZX Spectrum games like Hydrofoil and IK Plus. Did you program those routines yourselves? Those tunes? on Z80, or did you use
games?
Hydrofull and
yeah.
IQ Plus?
The only Spectrum stuff I did was on the Spectrum 128, which had the A-wide chip. The actual 48K Spectrum, I avoided like the plague, you know. It just like wasn't my...
Okay, but did you use some custom, was the routine yours, or did you use some other code and put the notes in the...
For the
Spectrum?
Well, for the Spectrum 128, I basically did a code swap with David Whittaker.
Okay.
He gave me a Z80 code for for the Amstrad, and I gave him my code for the Atari, and we did a swap.
So you used the same data?
I used his code, but then I adapted it. I adapted the data structures, so that they would be as similar as possible for the to the C64 data structures that I was using.
So it was adapted by someone else, and you just put the music in there.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. You also did some work on 16-bit computers. How did you find working with Amiga, Atari St, and Sega Mega Drive in general?
I only did a few games on the Amiga.
Populous was one of them.
Was one, and I basically used almost the identical player that I did on the C64, but coded in 68,000 and used the same data structures for the music.
Okay.
So it was all the same. It was before all that tracker stuff kind of took off with the Amiga. The problem with the Amiga in the early days was trying to get as much memory as you could to store your samples. The Atari St was very similar to Amstrad and Spectrum 128, and it had that, that dreadful A-wide chip, which couldn't really do much. But it had a 68,000, which was a nice processor, but the hardware was rubbish.
In the Atari St?
Atari St, yeah.
Okay. And what about Sega Mega Drive? It had a dedicated sound chip.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. The Sega Genesis was the Sega Mega Drive, which was... I always liked that machine, I liked working on that machine. It was the FM chip of the 68,000, the Z80.
Okay, but what was the FM chip some way crippling your... because it wasn't... there was no pulse width modulation, there was less room for in my opinion, there was less room to create sounds. It all sounded the same.
No, the FM chip is like a completely different animal. You're talking about, basically the old analog type of...
DX7?
The old synth thing is an analog synth. The idea of the DX7 was a FM frequency modulator, which is more kind of... it's a different animal altogether of how you create sound. I was quite familiar with some of the Yamaha FM synths.
Okay.
Because I'd had a DX7, which was also an FM chip, and I knew a lot of the quirks of the FM chip. So it wasn't that too much of a leap for me really to get into the FM. But it is completely different animal to what the SID chip was.
Yeah, obviously.
And nowadays, what kind of software, hardware you are using for making music? What do you recommend?
I'm not really do a lot of music these days, but if I do, then I tend to use Sibelius, which is just purely a scoring program, which is extremely powerful. Either that or I tend to use a sequencer. Or if I don't use that, then I just use a piece of manuscript paper with a pencil, the old-fashioned way.
Wow. So, what were you doing during the second half of the 90s and during the early 2000s?
Say that again?
What were you doing during the second half of the 90s and in early 2000s?
well, during the 90s, that's when I basically worked for Electronic Arts.
Yeah.
And I was pretty much there from the ground up. I was the first audio guy that they hired. And originally, when I worked for Electronic Arts, I did all the coding. I wrote all the code. I did all the music. And then the company started to grow like crazy with the success of the Sega Genesis and expanded. We had to make audio. We started hiring audio guys and creating teams to do the games right throughout the 90s, really. And then I left EA 2001.
Mm-hmm. And what about then?
And then after that, I did like just a series of weird kind of things and some other music writing as well. And somewhere around about 2007, I think that was the last time I did anything in the games business.
Mm-hmm. So a tune, or did you manage the last time was in 2007 you did a tune for a game, or did you manage just the audio stuff for the game?
No, I was kind of doing some ghost writing.
Okay, I see. And 2014 you did that Sid tune for the From Bedrooms to Billions movie, right?
I didn't do the Sid tune, no, but I did write a lot of that music for that film.
Yeah. Exactly.
But I worked with a guy called Max Hall, and he was the guy who he still has like all that equipment. And he has I don't know, he has some kind of system where he can program C64 SID quite easily, you know. And he's the guy who did all that on the SID.
Okay. Bartek?
Quiz?
Quiz? Mm-hmm. Okay, so I've prepared five pieces of your music. Some of the recorded off the SID chip, and some remixes.
Okay.
And we'll see if you recognize.
See if I recognize
Yeah,
them.
they're at least 10 seconds in length, so
Okay.
probably. Czy mogę poprosić? Pierwszy fragment.
They all from this level.
Do you know what this tune is?
No.
No. Really?
No.
Seriously?
No, I know it's some kind of big band
Yeah.
swing type arrangement of something, but I've no idea what it is.
So it's Ron Bertiel's rendition of your Delta.
Really?
Yeah.
Good God.
Poproszę drugi fragment.
I know what that is.
It's very unusual because very little. There are not much people that know this.
It's beach
piece of-
volleyball that we did at EA. Beach
it's not-
volleyball.
Not exactly. Kings of the Beach.
To the beach, yeah.
This is 1988
Yeah.
EA title.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, now here's my question for you.
Yeah.
What was that based on?
I didn't have C64. I don't know. Bartek?
There's a Caribbean band doing this music called Socra,
Okay.
and there was a band called Arrow.
Arrow.
Yeah, and the girl who was doing that is called Nana Chambers, and she was out of San Diego, and she gave me this cassette tape of all this stuff, this Socra Caribbean music stuff from this band called Arrow, and says, "Can you do stuff like that?" You know.
Okay.
So that's where that came from.
Okay. Nice bit of trivia.
Yeah.
Yeah. Poproszę trzeci fragment. much of the tune, but
No, I think you've got to play me a bit more than that, man.
yeah, it's
Come on.
it's
That could be anything.
yeah, it's Georgia Moroder's version, almost. It's Georgia Moroder style remix of Sanction.
Sanction?
Yeah,
Really?
yeah, it's
Doesn't sound like
from the
Sanction.
Syntax era CD. They did a lot of tunes with themes like Jar and Vangelis, and this one was Georgia Moroder, and it fit perfectly.
Okay.
Okay, czwarty fragment poproszę. To give you a hint, it's a game.
It sounds like Vangelis arrangement.
Almost.
I keep expecting to see a guy running in slow motion.
Yeah, it's a game for Durrell.
Oh, okay.
You remember this game? It's Sigma 7.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I don't remember the tune at all. I couldn't tell you the tune.
The original tune.
Yeah, I couldn't whistle a tune or anything. I don't
okay.
remember that tune.
Okej, i ostatni fragment, 5.
Yeah, I know that is. It was never on a game. It was something that I included on a demo.
Yeah, it's
But it was something that I wrote before I started doing
okay,
all the C64 stuff.
it's
I
called
call
the first part of Synth Sample 3.
Yeah,
So was it a music disc or just sample you send out to publishers?
it's called, I think I called it Casio Tune, which was an anagram of tenacious.
Okay. That's good. Okay, so Bartek? Okay, so maybe we have some questions from the audience. Mamy jakieś pytania do Roba? Podejdź.
I do have a question from the era when you were creating music for the Commodore 64 on the SID 6581 chip. What was it like to really compose and actually program it into the computer? It's like if you could share something that we haven't been able to read on Wikipedia already or something like that. If you could share something that you haven't shared before from the experience of actually creating the music for the Commodore 64, specifically for the SID chip.
Obviously, you had to write for the SID chip, so there's things that you certainly couldn't do. I mean, like I mentioned this once before, where somebody had asked me to do Gustav Holst's Planets, Mars, the one in 5.4, the thing that everybody knows, and I tried coding that up, and I had to turn around and say, look, man, this is not going to work, So there's certain things you could do and certain things you couldn't do. But to me, a lot of creating the stuff on the SID chip was trying to take advantages of the stuff that you knew you could do. I mean, the thing that I had, that I did in my code, which I exploited, was the fact that I had a thing where if the negative bit was set, which is the last bit 128, if that was set, then that would indicate a patch change. And so I had a system where within the music data itself, I could change the patch basically whenever I wanted to change the patch. I could change, and the patch was basically like a synthesizer patch where, if you have like a Korg Poly6 or something, you press a button, you get a different sound, you hit another patch 8, you get a different sound. So I had these patches that I had were basically 8 bytes long, and that included like the SID parameters and stuff. And I could change patches basically on the fly whenever I wanted, as quickly as I wanted to do that. And so that led to some of the things that I would do were, if I had a piece of manuscript paper right now, I could show you, but I don't, so it's going to be hard to explain. But by finding out parts of the music, where there was basically rests and not much happening, I could then quickly switch to another patch, put it in a different register, and then look at what kind of rhythms were involved and try to come up with some kind of melodic phrase that would fit that. And then when it all came together, it always sounded like there was a lot more going on, when in fact there isn't, you know. And that exploits some of the kind of oral perception that people have, because people can only listen to two things at once, you know. So if they listen to something that keeps repeating, your kind of brain takes it for granted that it's still there, even though you can only listen to two things at once. And so this idea of like just switching patches, changing all the SID parameters like crazy, being able to loop and monitor things on a machine code monitor in real time and edit those SID parameters to the millionth degree, which is what I used to do. Just, you know, edit and edit and edit until I could get exactly the way that I best think that I could get out of it, you know. So you're wringing the hell out of this thing to try to get the absolute maximum out of it is that kind of process that I would go through. And then I would never like do anything from start to finish, you know, 6 minutes or 17 minutes long, and then like, you know, try to code all that up. I would work on very small sections and build that up from there, you know, and then build that up from there, and then, you know, always checking to see that you've got things right. Because if you get one little note length type of value wrong, then, you know, things would gradually start drifting out of time. So you have to make sure that mistake didn't happen, you know. There's no error checking on this stuff.
Okay. Another question.
Hello.
Hi.
So it's a double question, actually. The first one is if you remember your first commercial tune that you've composed for Commodore, and the second one is what is actually your favorite tune that you composed, if you have such thing, or if you go back to your music often.
I think the first thing that I ever did was a game called Action Biker, which had this really little Mickey Mouse kiddywink tune on it, you know, which because that's what I thought kids' games were, you know. The favourite thing, I don't know. There's a few that stand out. One of which would be Sanctioned, and one would be Ken Tiller, maybe War, and maybe that Flash Gordon tune.
Oh yeah, Flash Gordon is really great. Okay, but was the Action Biker the first tune you've got paid for, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Action Biker. Yeah.
Action Biker.
Yeah. There might have been another job I did before that where they just paid me to actually write a tune on paper for the Amstrad.
Okay.
But I'm not sure if that what it was or how that happened. But I think all that early stuff that I did was the Mastertronic stuff.
Oh, okay. So how much did you get paid for the tune at the time? How much money did you?
How much money did I get paid?
No, I'm not asking for the exact figure, but just describe.
No, I've still got my old invoice book, actually. You know.
Was it just one-time payment?
Just a one-time payment, I think.
For
it was about 100 quid, 150 quid, 200,
okay.
200 pounds, something like that. You know, which doesn't seem a lot, you know, but at the time. You know, I mean, I was making maybe 50 quid a gig playing.
Oh, okay.
You know,
exactly.
So the prospect of getting, you know, a couple of days' work and getting a 150 pound was quite good, you know, especially when you accumulate that over a week or a month, you know.
Mm-hmm. And while you were making the tunes for C64, you were still actively making gigs. did you still play the usual stuff and make the C60 tunes on the side?
Say that again?
Were you doing these gigs?
Doing gigs, yeah.
Yeah, and doing the C64 music.
Yeah.
In that time.
Yeah, I was. I was playing like three or four nights a week, you know.
Okay.
And then, you know, I was pretty much working around the clock, you know, especially after the kind of Gremlin stuff was shipped, which was the thing on a spring. Then,
Okay.
you know,
Yeah.
then that's when I started getting loads and loads of work, and I couldn't basically turn any of it down, you know.
Okay.
So, but that, yeah.
Dobra, mamy pytanie? Another question?
Hello, Jakub Husak. I have one question because I was curious. You 3 channels were enough or not? And if not, that was the reason why have you began writing for Atari, which has 4, or something more?
No, I mean 3 channels is basically all that you had. So there was no choice, you know. Later on, I did manage to squeeze more out of it because I developed the digital channel as well, because people were doing digital audio, started doing digital samples, but I was the first person who basically incorporated that into music so that I could try to get a rock guitar in there with the SID chip, which was just unbelievable pain in the ass, because you're using 4-bit sort of volume register to try to, you know, get the samples going, and then that would completely screw up the rest of the things that you were trying to set up on the SID chip. So it was like a juggling act trying to get all the right parameters to try to make that happen, you know. But when you say that was only 3 channels, was 3 channels enough? No, I mean, I'd have loved to have had, you know, a couple of Prophet 5s in there that I could control with, you know, 2 or 3 dedicated microprocessors. That would have been awesome, you know. But the fact that you only had like the 3 channels, that's what you had, you know. The Atari, I think, only had 3 channels as well, because didn't you have to like gang 2 of them together to get a decent bass sound or something, and that would just leave 2 other channels.
Okay, did you invent your own sample routine for the C64, or did you use like the routine from Digitrams?
No, I think I had a friend of mine who had an Akai sampler, and he had some samples that I managed to get hold of, and I managed to get the data off and fudge the data, you know. I had to write some tools to make it into 4-bit samples, just so there was 2 samples per byte, 2 nibbles per byte. So I had to do that, and with some of the samples I managed to get to loop. I put a looping feature on the samples, and so I try to change the endpoint of the sample in real time to try to get a loop out of the sample, which was another feat in itself, trying to do that on a C64.
And the famous guitar in Skate or Die was done on Akai sampler and transferred to C64.
No, that was the sample that I got hired by Electronic Arts to go across in the summer of, it was either 87 or 88, I can't remember which, and I went over there for a few months, and they said, can you do the music for the game? And it was basically Skate or Die that got me the job, you know, because they just went, when they heard that tune, they went nuts. They went berserk, man. They said they never heard that guitar coming out of a C64, you know. But I took that sample with me from England. I had it before because I'd used it
in which
in Arcade Classics.
Arcade Classics?
Yeah.
Was it for C64 or
Yeah,
for?
that was a C64 tune which had like the rock guitar sample in it.
I see.
And it had like the some organ samples as well. So I took those to the States when I did Skate or Die. That's what got me the job over there.
Okay, and I noticed that you didn't use a lot of arpeggio. Why not?
I didn't use a lot.
You didn't?
I did.
Oh, but not in the early works.
No, I did use a lot of arpeggio. You're talking about like where you
Playing
wobble.
free tunes, wobbly.
You basically
Yeah.
we used to call them wobble chords because they wobble at 60 hertz
Okay.
between like 3 notes or something.
In
No, I used a lot of that. I mean,
In Commando, you did octave arpeggio for the high notes, but
Which one?
In Commando.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was still like using the same kind of routine. I used like octaves. I used fourths, fifths. I used thirds, minor thirds, six, minor six, 2 notes. Then I expanded onto I did 3 note chords. And I had like a piece of code where I could define any musical interval. There's like on set theory, musical set theory. I could define any kind of basic note combination
Interval.
for those wobble chords.
Okay.
So
Mamy jeszcze jakieś pytania? One more question.
My question is, what was your inspiration? What inspired you to write such a music you wrote?
I think the inspiration comes from a melting pot of all your musical influences that you had at the time. So my musical influences started with my musical hero from Poland, who's the guy who's dedicated at your airport, which is Chopin. Chopin is my favorite piano composer, and I played a lot of Chopin when I was a kid, and I have like all the books of the Chopin waltzes, mazurkas, polonaise, nocturnes, etudes, and at one point I could hack my way through the revolutionary C minor Chopin. Anyway, I digress because I have a bust of Chopin in my living room. Like, I've got a bust that big of Chopin, and a friend of mine is also a complete nut on Chopin, and he talks about Rosemary Brown. Have you heard of Rosemary Brown? Look up Rosemary Brown and Chopin and you'll figure out what I'm talking about. Anyway, you have a whole list of musical influences. Chopin was one of them, and I have a whole list of other things. At the time was obviously Jean-Michel Jarre. There was like the whole romantic stuff in the 80s with the Midge Ure and Soft Cell and all those other kind of bands. There was a whole influence, from the blues and jazz side as well, that Chick Corea and Herbie Hancock and all those people. So you get a whole melting pot of these things that inspires you, and sometimes it's a melodic fragment that you might pick up on, that suddenly you think, oh, that's a kind of cool combination of notes. Sometimes it's a bit of sound design where you might get a couple of sounds out the SID chip, and that provides inspiration for you to develop something and move on, So basically, I think it's a whole melting pot and a whole lot of different things that can influence you to provide inspiration,
And obviously, Larry Fast was your inspiration.
Larry Fast, yeah.
It's the Synergy project.
Yeah, the Synergy stuff. Yeah, I had the albums,
Albion or
Odeon.
Odeon.
Yeah.
The Odeon. Okay, mamy jeszcze jakieś pytania? Okay, so looks like we don't have any questions. Rob, thank you very much for attending this Pixel Heaven and Rob Hubbard.
Cheers. Thanks.